Hey sis, today I came through to tell you it is going to take diligence, determination, and discipline to be, do, and have all that God has called you to. And that's why cornerstone number 3 is commitment. Hey there, Beacon. Welcome home to the Bounce Back Blueprint Community Podcast. I am your Bounce Back guide, Tiffany Huff Struthers, and I am excited to be your guide as you thrive on the journey from setback to impact and income. Today, we are digging deep into our final cornerstone, serving with excellence and integrity. And if you haven't already listened to Cornerstones 1 and 2, then I'm going to encourage you to pause this episode here and go back and listen to those 2 episodes first, because the cornerstones build on each other. So just a quick review. Cornerstone number 1 was clarity, understanding that faith and focus are the foundation. Cornerstone number 2 was courage, and that is having the voice of a victor and the posture of power. And again, today we are digging deep into cornerstone number 3, commitment, serving with excellence and integrity. Now, as I stated in the last episode in cornerstone number 2, our guiding scriptures for this bounce back blueprint journey for you to move from setback to impact and income is Isaiah 61. So in the first 2 cornerstones, we were through verses 1 through 3, and today we are going to be focusing on Isaiah 61 verses 4 through 6 because they are so important to this piece on commitment. So let me read those so that we can dig right in. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Strangers will shepherd your flocks. Foreigners will work your fields and vineyards. And you will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. Woo! I hope you caught that. So again, quick review. Verses 1 through 4 spoke to the fact that you are called and anointed by God, and there is a certain person or group of people that he has called you to serve with your message, so that you need to be courageously positioned in power and using your voice as a victor to bestow on them that crown of beauty for ashes. And so what this is saying in verses 4 through 6 is through your commitment, those you were anointed and called to serve will rebuild the ancient ruins. Get that deep down in your spirit. That's some breaking of generational curses. That's some legacy building, right? It says they will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. And I need you to understand how important this piece on commitment is, because when we say rebuild the ancient ruins, this is not about playing in the dirt. These verses speak to the manifestation of all that God has promised you through what he has called you to do, through your commitment to moving from setback to impact and income. And so I need you to know that this journey was not created by Tiffany Huff Struthers, right? This is divinely ordained. This is written in the word, and it clearly states that not only will you have impact in that those you are called to will rebuild the ancient ruins and take away the devastations of generations, but sis, shepherds will herd your flocks, right? You will eat off the wealth of nations. And so what that is saying is through your commitment, when you are committed to serving and leading with excellence and integrity, God's promises will be made manifest. And so I want to spend a little time sharing with you what I know to be true about really getting to the point that you are committed to serving with excellence and integrity, really getting to the point where you understand that your commitment to serving with excellence and integrity is how those promises and those scriptures are made manifest, and also how you will make the impact and that income that God has destined for you, okay? And so I'm going to give you 3 shifts that you need to make if you are going to be committed in the way that you need to. And the first shift is to understand that only the strong surrender. I need you to catch that. Only the strong surrender. And we start here because, the world will have you think that those who surrender are weak, right? Those who wave the white flag are defeated, right? But I need you to understand that in this case, in order for you to be committed to serving with excellence, to do that work, right? Because we are not talking about, anything easy. God has not called you to something simplistic, right? It's going to take commitment to see this through. And what that also means is you are going to have to sacrifice your plan. You're going to have to sacrifice the way that you thought it would work. You need to be committed to the vision, but not the specific journey. So you need to be willing to sacrifice and understand that it is an exercise of strength when you are willing to sacrifice, because you know that what God has said is, and that's the end of it, right? And so I want you to consider, even now as you are preparing, or whatever stage you are in this journey, that you reevaluate where you are, where you've been, where you're going, and how perhaps you might be stuck, or you might be tripping over things that God called you to trample on because you refuse to surrender your will and your way. If you're going to be committed to serving with excellence and integrity, you are going to need to surrender your plan and adopt God's, and move in it with that excellence and integrity, right? The word says that whatever you do, do it unto the Lord. So even those things, those pieces, those parts that you don't like about the journey, you have to be committed to carrying those out with excellence and integrity. And that's a lot right there. That last minute and a half might be something you need to replay over and over again. Because again, these cornerstones are about getting brutally honest with yourself. And I don't suggest that you move forward with any other episodes until you are able to digest, right? Internalize these truths. So that's the first shift. You have to understand and adopt the truth that only the strong surrender. And then the second truth is that the second shift, I should say, is you have to move from simply believing in God to depending on God. I'm going to repeat that. You have to move from simply believing in God to depending on God. That means that you have to know that this cannot be made manifest without Him. That means that you have to depend on Him for every step you take, every breath you take, every person you interact with, for what to do next, right? It's not enough to say, yes, I believe in God. You have to depend on Him like you depend on oxygen to live, right? You have to depend on Him like your life depends on it, because it does. And I need you to be clear and understand that the life you had before, right? The way you were living prior to committing to this journey, you believed in God, but not to the extent that your life depended on it. And that's why you had to first surrender to His plan. Because when you believed in Him, you believed that you could do it your way and pray and expect Him to bless your thing. But when you depend on Him, you don't do a thing unless you pray and hear it from Him and know that it will be blessed. So you have to make the shift from believing in God to depending on Him. And that is part of, again, that first truth that you have to internalize, that only the strong surrender. Because I can tell you this from my own personal experience. People have faith until they have to have faith. People want to walk on water until God calls them to walk on water. And because there will be some points in this journey, there will be some times when you are committed that no one else is, you are going to have to accept that you have to depend on God. because you will find yourself out on the water thinking that others are walking with you, beside you, behind you. And when you look, there will be no one there because they only believed. They didn't depend on what God had said, right? But you have to depend on it for yourself. You have to know that if you release your hold on Him, if you take your eyes off Him, if you look from the left or the right, that is when you will sink. Not because He isn't there, but because you are doubting. You have to depend, not doubt. And please hear me. I'm not saying that I want you to pray prayers of procrastination. I'm not saying that you should never move forward unless everything is perfect. That's not what I'm saying. If again you go back to Cornerstone number one and you are famous at home first and you are building that relationship, then you know how to communicate with God. You know the rhythms that He has with you. You know the ebbs and the flows. You know how to discern His voice, right? You know how to welcome the Spirit in so that when you are uncertain or you don't know what to do next, you know to seek wisdom and to seek it from your source. You know to go to people after you go to God, right? It's so important that you embrace this truth. You have to depend on God. It's not simply about believing. And I'm not saying that you don't believe, but it has to go further than that. In this season of being committed, in this season of serving with excellence and integrity, you are going to be stretched. And I can tell you again from my own personal experience that you will feel like the surrender is the stretch, but moving into that dependency beyond the surface level belief is an even additional stretch. And then this last shift will again be a stretch, and that is to understand the difference between your source and a resource. Understand the difference between your source and a resource, right? I'm sure you've heard it said before that God does not give a vision without provision, right? And I wholeheartedly believe that and know that to be true. However, we have to be clear, right? We have to be able to understand and discern the difference between what the provision is and who the visionary is, right? We have to know the difference between God being the source and God providing resources. And this is challenging for people. In my experience and the women that I've worked with, I find that people operate in extremes when it comes to this piece, right? They feel like they shouldn't have to do anything because God is just going to provide everything, or they don't trust God to provide anything and they feel like they have to do everything. And it's likely because there is a challenge to making this distinction and applying this distinction and applying this truth to every situation and circumstance that is presented, right? So I want to kind of demonstrate this by looking at your cell phone, right? You're likely listening to this podcast episode from your cell phone. So when we think about your cell phone is connected to a carrier, right? So you have T-Mobile or you have Sprint or you have, I don't know, Metro PCS, right? That cell phone carrier is the source for your cell phone. Without the source, your cell phone is not going to work. It will be obsolete. It might tell time if the power is on, but it's not going to do very much else, right? It's not going to allow you to make calls. You're not going to be able to go on Instagram. You won't be able to, download apps and pay a bill. You need that connection to the source, right? Now, in addition to being connected to the source, your cell phone probably has a case on it, right? So that it is protected. It might have a screen protector. It has a charging cord, right? Those are all resources. But if your cell phone has no connection to the source, it does not function as it is intended to function. It can have the case, it can have the screen protector, and it can have a cord, but it is not going to be able to move and operate and do what it's supposed to do without that connection to the source. And the same is true for you, right? So you can have money, right? You can have people, you can have things, but if you don't have the connection to the source, if you don't understand the difference between the fact that God is your source, your connection to God is what is going to ensure that you operate at maximum capacity, and those people, things, that money or resources that add to your connection, then you are going to find it very difficult to execute and serve with excellence and integrity. And the reason being is your integrity will come into question, and the way you operate excellently will come into question when you feel like you've got to go beyond your source to get the resources to be sure that the ancient ruins are being rebuilt and the places that are to be restored are no longer devastated. And don't get me wrong, don't hear me saying that you aren't going to have to do the work to obtain those resources, that you aren't going to have to excellently and with integrity make sure that what is necessary to carry out the plan is obtained. But what I do want you to hear me say is that there is a hierarchy, right? There is a priority. You have to prioritize your source over the resource, because as long as you are staying connected to your source, you are going to know what resources are available and those you need to pursue. You're going to know which doors God is opening and those that He has closed for a reason. And you aren't going to feel pressure to compromise. You are not going to feel pressure to compromise the excellence of your execution or the integrity of the way you serve, because you are committed to manifesting according to your source's specific plan and purpose for your life. I hope that makes sense. I hope you caught that. It's so important. You have to know that only the strong surrender. You have to know that you have to shift from believing to depending, and you absolutely have to understand the hierarchy and the need to prioritize your source over the resources if you are going to be committed on this bounce back journey, if you are going to be committed to manifesting according to God's specific plan and purpose for your life, if you are really ready to thrive on this journey from setback to impact and income through the power of sharing your story courageously, you got to get committed. You got to get committed. And guess what? I know that we don't grow alone, and I don't expect you to. And that is why we have created the Bounce Back Blueprint community. And it is open to beacons just like you, beacons of light, beacons of hope, beacons of restoration and building legacies. And I want you to join us today. If you are listening to this podcast, you can click the link right under the episode. If you're listening on YouTube, again, you can click the link under this video. Join this community, get the support that you need so that you can gain the clarity and build the courage to make the commitment to manifesting what God has called and created you to. We are about to do the thing, and I don't want you to be left out. So please join the community. You don't have to grow alone. You don't have to struggle in silence. We are here to support you. And last but certainly not least, please, if you have not already, subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening, and be sure to rate and leave a review so that other beacons just like you who are ready to make the commitment to their bounce back blueprint are able to locate this resource and get connected with the community. I am so super excited that you have stuck with me through all three of the cornerstones, and I am even more excited for the series that we are going to kick off with in episode 1. Stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed so you are the first to know when that episode drops. Send me a message, a DM. Follow me on Instagram at @TiffanyHuff so that we can continue the conversation. Until then, I look forward to seeing you inside the Community Beacon. And of course, know that God is not going to play you. But if you aren't committed to serving and executing with excellence and integrity, you are playing yourself. Be blessed.